Thailand is a beautiful country and a wonderful place for a vacation. But if you ever stay in a location near the woods, don't go out at night. Me and a couple of my buddies, Tom and Lucas, had just finished college and were looking for a nice, relaxing vacation. I convinced them to come with me to Thailand. I'd been there a couple of times before, and it was far too beautiful and relaxing. We decided to check out the Chiang Mai region in the north, since I'd never been up there. We stayed at a small village that held a motel for tourists. It was a bit of a shack, but it had air conditioning, so I didn't complain. The room had 2 beds and a couch, and Tom was the one who got to sleep in the latter. There was no way any of us wanted to share beds with another dude. We wanted to explore the forest when we arrived, but it was already late in the day, and we were exhausted from the long trip. We decided to chill out for a while and explore the village. The woman who owned the motel was the only person there who spoke English, albeit poorly, and was nice enough to show us around and babysit us, ignorant Americans. She spoke to us before settling in for the night. The only thing you guys need to know is important rule we have. Never go out at night. Why not? Asked Lucas. Because forests have dangerous animal. You no one get snake bite or spider bite or nothing, she replied. We didn't think anything of it as we prepared for bed. But right before we settled in, Tom noticed something as he looked out the window. You guys, come look at this, he said. The village was seated on top of a hill which allowed us to get a spectacular view of miles of forest beneath an ocean of stars from our window. But there was one thing in particular that caught our eye. There appeared to be a strange light coming from several miles away in the moonlit forest. It was a white light, which appeared to be pulsating as it moved through trees and brush. What do you think it is? Asked Tom. I haven't got a clue, replied Lucas as I shrugged my shoulders. I'm guessing it's just some dude with a lantern, I said. I thought it was against the rules to go out at night, said Lucas. Maybe he isn't from the village, I responded. Or maybe he just don't care about the rules, said Tom. We stared at it a few minutes before shrugging it off and going to bed. The next day we awoke with the sunrise, had breakfast, and headed out towards the forest. Next to the path leading out of the village, there was a pit with a waist-high bamboo fence surrounding it. We held our breath as we walked by, unable to stand the horrid stench it emitted. Inside was filled with what appeared to be animal entrails, rotting rice, dead lizards, and maggots. Bleg! Why'd they have to put their waste pit right next to the path? I complained. We spent hours exploring the forest, examining the wildlife that could be found. We found snakes, wildcats, a troop of monkeys, and lizards, including a monitor lizard. The forests of Thailand were so rich with life compared to those in the northwestern US. We would return to the motel each night, and each night we would see the light coming from the forest, always in a different spot, always pulsating, and always moving. Eventually, I asked the motel owner about the light. Oh, I don't know, she responded. People here see the light too. They think it's a ghost. A ghost? I asked. Oh, it's just superstition, she replied. Indeed, Thais were very superstitious people compared to Westerners, especially in the rural regions. I believe in the supernatural. But as a science major, I always raise an eyebrow of skepticism to claims like this. Nonetheless, it triggered my curiosity. One day, we stumbled upon a dead leopard. It looked like a fresh kill and appeared to have had its organs devoured from the gaping hole in its abdomen. What could have killed a leopard like this? I asked. The other two just continued to examine the creature with puzzled looks. What if that light in the forest was actually a poacher? Asked Tom. And why exactly would a poacher only take the entrails? I replied. It looks like an animal attack. But why would an animal only take the entrails? Said Lucas. We had no answers, nor did the motel owner. But my curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to know what was causing the light, and if it had anything to do with the leopard. I bugged my buddies to join me and sneak out during our last night at the village. They didn't want to at first, but after calling them chicken and pansies, I finally coerced their inner masculinity to join me. We armed ourselves with machetes sheathed on our belts, and we quietly snuck out a couple of hours after sunset. We brought flashlights with us, but only intended to use them when we absolutely needed to. The moonlight was sufficient for most areas, and we didn't want the entity to know we were approaching it. As we drew close, I noted two strange phenomena occurring around us. The first was that the nighttime forest, usually noisy with insects chirping and frogs croaking, has begun to dim down to near silence. The second was the sudden drop in temperature as we drew near. In Thailand, 75 Fahrenheit is considered cold weather, and anything below 70 was freezing. As we drew near, I could actually begin to see my breath. We were starting to shiver, having left the room with only t-shirts on. It was theoretically explainable by natural phenomena, but I began to suspect that something beyond science was at work here. I nonetheless continued on, expecting to find a natural cause for these observations. That expectation began to wither as we were now close enough to observe the light source more clearly. Not only was it pulsing, but it also appeared to have tendrils of light surrounding it. They moved like plasma through the air. The main source was obscured behind a bush, but it became quite clear that there was a figure standing within it. A Thai woman, young and beautiful. Only her face could be seen from over the bush. A 3-foot radius around her was the light originating from. It pulsed about once per second, dimming briefly before returning to normal. Her gaze was toward the ground. My heart pounded with excitement, astonishment, and fear. What was she? A ghost? An angel? We stood there in silence and amazement until somebody broke a twig underfoot. The girl's eyes shot in our direction. She knew we were watching her. She stared for a moment before she darted behind the bush she was hiding behind, and her obscure figure began to drift away through the forest. I was more than curious now. I was hooked to a line and could only be satisfied by understanding the thing I had seen. The other two had felt it also and followed me without hesitation when I directed them. We had our flashlights on now, walking swiftly in pursuit of the entity. We watched as it entered into a cave on a cliff wall and stopped just outside of it. We knew from horror movies that dark forests were a bad thing, and caves in the middle of them were even worse. "Bro, I'm scared," said Tom. "I don't want to go in," said Lucas. "Well, do you expect me to go in alone?" I replied. "It's not too late to turn back. We can forget this ever happened," said Tom. No, we can't forget, and my ignorance will haunt me if I fail to understand what that thing was," I said. We paused for a moment, looking at one another, as if drawing straws in our minds. I finally volunteered. "I'll go in under the condition that you two owe me all I can drink for the rest of the year." They stood for a moment before Tom spoke. "Fine, I'll buy you drinks. If you want to go in, you can. We'll wait here." With much hesitation, I slowly walked into the cave, praying under my breath. I was now shaking, not from cold, but fear. The odor came quickly, the same as the one emitted from the pit of rotting entrails, but it was far stronger. I coughed as I covered my nose with my shirt. Before long, I noticed the bottom of the cave was littered with animal bones. I was just about to chicken out when I saw the back of her head, protruding from behind a rock. I stood and stared for at least a minute, not knowing how to respond. Finally, I managed to whimper a hello to the entity. It turned around, and I saw its face once more. But this face was no longer that of an enchantingly beautiful Thai woman. It was hideously burned. Charred black teeth partially exposed through deteriorated flesh. Her eyes had shriveled in their sockets. The creature slowly drifted into full view from behind the rock, each additional inch causing my heart to sink deeper into my chest. The creature's body wasn't a body at all. It didn't even have a neck. Instead, the creature's entrails dangled from its windpipe and hovered above the ground. Its heart was beating, the light pulsing along with it. Its stomach and intestines slowly squirmed, as if the creature was digesting something. Chunks of adipose were attached to its viscera, which dripped with a mixture of blood and fat. My jaw dangled as I stood there, frozen in terror at what I saw. Its lungs contracted as it let out an unnatural hissing shriek. It lunged towards me, and I finally turned around to sprint it as fast as I could out of the cave. "Run! Run!" I shouted towards Tom and Lucas, who were waiting for me. They saw the creature behind me as I ran past them, and without hesitation, they followed behind me. We ran and ran, occasionally stumbling over a log or brush, but always making sure that we were together and that nobody had been left behind. The creature certainly hadn't, and it was no more than 200 feet away at any time. Eventually, I spotted an animal with my flashlight, which began running across the forest floor with us. It looked like a feral pig. Hoping to make a distraction, I pulled out my machete, caught up to it, and struck it in the neck. It shrieked in pain and stumbled, but I kept on running. Before long, I began hearing the animal shrieking furiously behind us. I turned my head back to look and saw that the entity had captured it. I stopped in my tracks to catch my breath, my friends joining me. We watched as the animal was suspended in the air by the creature's tendrils of light, which were ripping out the animal's intestines. I felt sick and wanted to vomit as I saw it begin to devour the raw viscera. We continued to run onwards back to the village, clearly visible on the hill, with a lamplight emitting from our room. Gasping for air, we burst into the room and locked the door behind us before collapsing to the floor in exhaustion. We closed the curtains, dimmed the lights, and sat in our beds, not daring to even try sleeping. The other two were silent as I prayed and clutched at the crucifix around my neck. "What was that thing?" whispered Lucas. "A demon? A ghost? A monster?" "I have no idea," I responded. We sat in the darkness for an hour or so before we saw a pulsating light emerging from the forest. We quickly hid under the beds and held our breath. We could hear strange sounds from outside, as if the creature had been devouring something else. Within a few minutes, it stopped, and the light faded. We continued to hide until the break of dawn, and we stayed in our room until we saw other people coming out of their houses. "I told you guys not to go out at night," the motel owner said with anger. "We should have listened," I replied. The other villagers also seemed aware of what we had done. They stared at us angrily as they began taking rotten food to the pit just outside of the forest, which was now empty. We left southbound to Pattaya, where I spent the next few days taking great liberty in my free drink privilege. We tried our best to sleep, but nightmares kept waking us. Any encounter with a rotten smell or a light in the darkness brought me dread. Eventually, I went to a temple and spoke to a monk about what I'd seen. He explained that in Thai mythology exists a creature known as the Krasue, or Grasue. As the legend goes, a beautiful woman who lived centuries ago was burned at the stake. A witch tried to save her by casting a spell, but did so too late. Only her head and inner organs survived the fire. Her spirit is said to haunt the forests of Thailand and is always hungry. She devours the entrails of animals along with rotting carcasses and rotting food. Thailand is a beautiful country and a wonderful place for a vacation. But if you ever stay in a location near the woods, don't go out at night.